We all know about getting a call like this. Just push the right button and say hello. But for many of us, hearing God's calling remains a mystery. As Paul Stevens explains in The Other 6 Days, almost the only people who speak of being called of God are full-time pastors and missionaries. So it seems perfectly natural when we hear pastors tell how they were called to the ministry. But for the rest of us, calling seems to belong to another world. And we've come to expect missionaries who travel to other countries to have had a call from God into that kind of work. Most of us admire such callings, but think of them as out of reach when it comes to ourselves. It's easy to think of calling as some kind of spectacular event reserved for those in so-called full-time Christian service. To associate God's calling with ordinary work as a dental assistant, bus driver, or plumber may seem almost sacrilegious. If there were such a thing as a spiritual value meter, these occupations would fit on the low end of the scale. Why would the Holy God call anyone to work in such a secular role? Work like that just does not measure up on the typical scale of spiritual values. Often, when Christians do speak of God's calling, they're really describing what the Bible calls His sending. Let's say you are in the living room and I am in the kitchen. If you say, "Please come here," you would be calling me to join you. Then suppose after I join you in the living room, you say, "Go get my glasses," which are back in the kitchen. You would be sending me to complete a task. Now let's change the setting. God is in heaven, you are in the world. But God says, "Come. Come to me by trusting Jesus, my Son." This is God's calling to transfer your allegiance from the dark world system to Him. Now you have been joined to God through your faith in Jesus. But the story doesn't end here. God has a purpose for you back in the world. So He says, "Go. Go into that darkened world and represent me and my kingdom there." Scripture speaks of God who calls you into His kingdom and glory. So His invitation is His calling. Jesus said, "As you sent me into the world, I have sent them into the world." And so God's assignment is His sending. When God sends you into His world, you cannot go everywhere in that world, so you will fill a certain place in it. Literally billions of those places are workplaces. The workers God sends into all those workplaces include an amazing variety: pilots, firefighters, plumbers, scientists, cashiers, detectives, musicians, farmers, pastors, homemakers, judges, and countless others. Such variety raises questions. How does God let you know what kind of work He is sending you into? Biblical examples point us to two ways God sends His people into their work. First, He may send us to our work through His specific direction. Second, He may send us to work through the unfolding of events. How did God send Saul or Paul into his work of taking the gospel to Gentiles? Through specific direction that began dramatically as he was on the road to Damascus, intending to take Christians as prisoners. How did God send Joseph into Egypt to work first as a household manager, then as a prison trustee, and finally as prime minister? Through the unfolding of events, the painful events of being sold into slavery and then being falsely accused of rape. How did God send Daniel into Babylon to work in various positions in the government there? Through the unfolding of events, the painful event of being carried off as a prisoner of war. What if God has not specifically directed? How can you decide on this or that work? How are you wired? Your God-given gifts may help you to discover His vocational will. Your gifts are like tools. Suppose a company hires you to work. When you arrive, you discover they have provided you with a circular saw, a cordless drill, and a hammer. That's a pretty good clue they'll be sending you to work as a carpenter. Or what if they provide you instead with a computer, a spreadsheet program, and tax preparation software? Most likely they'll be sending you to work as an accountant. In a similar way, reflecting on your own giftings, abilities, and motivations will shed light on the kinds of work God has given you the tools to do. God made us what we are. God has created us in King Jesus for the good works that He prepared ahead of time as the road we must travel. The Giftedness Center offers a helpful free resource, Discovering Your Giftedness, a step-by-step guide. That will help you identify the set of tools God has gifted you with. Here is the link to their website, thegiftednesscenter.com. Life circumstances mean not everyone gets to choose their line of work. The slaves to whom Paul wrote did not get a choice of jobs. Yet Paul assured slaves in both Colossae and Ephesus that they were serving Christ in their work. In this world map made of dots, think of each dot as a work position held by someone. Whether He sends you by means of a specific direction or by unfolding events, God locates you where He wants you to serve as light and salt in His world.